Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very much appreciate this hearing. Always excited to hear about the subcommittee thinking futuristically, because it's happening anyway. So I'm very interested in autonomous cars and autonomous aircraft. This is a very controlled space in the nation's capital that I represent. Recently, and I suppose this first question is for Mr. Joby or perhaps Dr. Privet, we have seen how, with or without the Congress, and it looks like without, autonomous cars are moving, some of them being tested on the streets, and there's been an occasional mishap. That gets a huge, if we had the kind of publicity that gets to the daily accidents on the road, we'd be reading nothing else in the paper. But what we do know is that these autonomous cars are far safer than you or me at the wheel. Given the fact that the public gets scared off, perhaps, by one single accident, as we've had in the recent months, how close are we to moving toward remote or pilotless aircraft? Is this still something that needs a lot of work, even though, to our credit, the subcommittee is thinking about what you're doing now? I mean, is this not anything that's going to happen within the next 10 years, or what is your best estimate on that?
I think there are many pieces in place. Aircraft basically today are flying highly automated already, but I believe we have to collect a huge amount of data actually with pilots on board to make sure that we can prove that these systems are ready to be autonomous, that we've covered all the cases. So that's kind of the approach that we're taking, having the pilots on board. And then it may also not be a one-size-fits-all. It could be that we can prove that certain routes, certain circumstances have never had a pilot, the need for a pilot to intervene, and we've got everything covered there, so we can incrementally potentially start removing the pilots from those vehicles. But I do think it is certainly a number of years out.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree that the goal is to demonstrate, as you spoke about, Congresswoman, that it is these systems have the potential to be much safer than human piloted aircraft, but there are things that, like weather, for example, that we talked about, where humans and our cognitive abilities to make really complex decisions are really quite spectacular, and so we want to leverage the skills and the capabilities that the human pilot has, as well as the skills that the autonomous and automated systems have. And so...
Yeah, well, I want you to help us think, for example, if there are autonomous cars and autonomous aircraft, remember we have pretty close to autonomous planes and autonomous underground railroad. We just had a spectacular accident here, I don't know, about a dozen years ago, with somebody at the wheel, but our underground subways basically drive themselves and have been doing so for a long time. And when a pilot gets in the air, he's not sitting there driving the plane. That plane is on automatic pilot as well. So it's pretty clear we're already there. But if we go to autonomous planes, then everybody can have an autonomous plane. You don't even have to drive it because now it's autonomous. We may be into, and Mr. Privet perhaps understands this, we may be into what we have here in the District of Columbia, and I would gainsay perhaps my colleagues have the same as well. Now we have a lot of congestion on the roads because anybody can get an Uber or a Lyft, and those of us who ride them are very glad they're out there. But, Mr. Privet, what we've done here in the city is, or at least there's a proposal, to put a tax on Uber and Lyft so that we can help fund our underground metro, as we call it, our underground railroad, which is going broke, so that we would have a choice and not be left as we are now with one or the other. And what Uber and autonomous cars and the like provide are choices. Yet there may need to be a whole new set of traffic rules, a new set of who gets to drive. Perhaps we in the Congress ought to be thinking about this, or even more so at the local level. And I realize I'm asking you to think in the future, but that's what we're trying to do here today. So when you think about how we'd have to deal with congestion, perhaps we'd have less congestion, perhaps in the air, perhaps we'd have more, perhaps we'd have fewer accidents, perhaps more. Who needs to be thinking about that? Who is thinking about these kinds of issues as we get excited about autonomous vehicles? You want to begin, Dr. Prevett?
Yes, I believe that going to the air gives you more choices, just like you said. I mean, now you've got another way of doing a multimodal trip, and we certainly have to think about the congestion that it might create in the air, that it also might create around the skyports as we optimize trips through our network. We see Uber, for example, as a platform where we also want to integrate in with public transportation and with all these other means and really provide.
So you understand why the district thinks that Uber ought to help us pay for underground transportation, even as we've had to make room for more Ubers on the road here.
Well, I would say that's not necessarily my area of expertise.
I'd like you to submit to the chairman what those whose expertise it is to know about this think about using some form of transportation to help fund another form of transportation. But go ahead.
So I think that there's an incredible opportunity, just as Congress funded our national highway system and then funded the construction of many of our airports. There's an incredible opportunity here to, as Congress looks forward, to think about how to support this new and more efficient mode of transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the ranking member.